Allow me to recount an event from 2 years ago when my life began to unravel. At the time, my daughter was just 4 years old, and due to my demanding work schedule, I had limited opportunities to spend time with her. Consequently, every moment I did share with her held immense significance. She was at that age when children start uttering meaningful words, and I cherished those instances. My wife, a stay-at-home mom, took on the bulk of the parenting duties while I toiled 6 days a week. I had recently received a promotion to a well-paying job for which I felt inadequately qualified. Moreover, we were expecting another child. Since my daughter had begun to speak, it had been a joy to be in her presence. While she started speaking a bit later than her peers, she had now developed a penchant for talking that was unstoppable, and I absolutely adored it. Hearing her words reminded me of the driving force behind my daily grind, providing for my family. One Sunday evening, I was indulging in my favorite weekly ritual, spending quality time with my daughter, watching a movie, and being joined by our 6-year-old Pitty. I relished it when she commented on what appeared on the TV screen. If a cat made an appearance, she'd mention my grandma's cat's name. If a dog appeared, she'd excitedly shout out our Pitty's name. When she spotted someone who resembled me on the screen, she'd point and say, "Dada," her endearing way of saying, "Daddy." Similarly, if she saw someone resembling my brother, she'd say "uncool," signifying uncle, and so on. She'd continue this delightful commentary until fatigue overcame her, or she drifted off to sleep. However, most PG-13 movies featured romantic scenes, and I avoided watching R-rated movies with my 4-year-old. Yet in today's cinema landscape, it is challenging to find a movie devoid of romance. On this particular evening, we were watching Captain Marvel movie, which wasn't primarily a romantic film, but rather family-friendly and enjoyable for both me and my daughter. Plus, it featured a female superhero as the lead character, which I hoped would empower her as she grew and boost her self-esteem. Then came the scene in the movie where Brie Larson, portraying Captain Marvel, engaged in an action moment. It was at this point that things took an intriguing turn. During that scene, my daughter remarked, "That's Mama and Ini." She referred to her mother as Mama and me as Dada. But who was this Ini? Initially, I assumed she might have misspoken, as we had regular family visitors, but I had never heard her mention anyone named Ini before. I was left bewildered as to who Ini could possibly be. I contemplated her words for a few minutes and decided to rewind the romantic scene in the movie to see if she would repeat, "Ini." To my surprise, she did. I turned to her and gazed into her innocent, beautiful eyes. Softly, I inquired, "Who is Ini?" In response, she pointed toward the ceiling, which left me utterly perplexed. Perhaps she was pointing to God or something else, I thought. To further investigate, I played a different movie with a romantic scene to observe her reaction, and to my astonishment, my daughter once again uttered the exact same phrase. This left me wondering if she was trying to convey something to me, though I had no inkling as to what it could be. Who is Ini? Became the most significant enigma in my life during that period. While some may argue that children's recollections and statements cannot always be trusted, I found myself questioning this belief around that time. I came across a news article that recounted the remarkable tale of a 4-year-old who vividly recalled their past life, even identifying their own murderer. It was a fascinating account, illustrating the special wisdom that children can sometimes possess, especially at that tender age. While I recognized that this story revolved around the concept of reincarnation, my situation was distinct and firmly rooted in the present. Nevertheless, the eerie parallels in age and my recent encounter with that story led me to believe that children could be conduits of mysterious insight. The greatest enigma for me at that time remained the identity of Ini. I grappled with the mystery, unable to bring myself to discuss it with my wife. The mere thought of confronting her about Ini seemed unwise, as I had complete faith in her honesty. Speaking of my wife, she hailed from the Middle East, having immigrated to America with her family during her teenage years. Raised as a Muslim, her background was similar to mine, as my parents had also migrated from the same country, though I was born in the United States. Our marriage was arranged through familial connections, and we both identified as Muslims, albeit not extremely devout. We observed Islamic traditions and celebrated religious festivities, occasionally attending the mosque on Fridays. My wife's choice to wear a hijab or not was entirely her own, and I respected her decision either way. At the time, she was 24 years old, while I was 30. She pursued psychology in college, and prior to starting a family, she worked as a high school teacher. We collectively decided that she would become a stay-at-home mom to care for our children, while I pursued a career as a financial manager, a relatively young professional in such a role at a major bank. Our move to our current apartment occurred about 7 months ago, prompted by a job promotion that came with a substantial salary increase of over $50,000. Returning to the narrative, I distinctly remember putting my baby to sleep that night, my thoughts still entangled with the enigmatic Anai. Accusing my wife of something as grave as infidelity without any concrete evidence seemed not only foolish, but also unjust. My wife had been an exceptional partner in every sense, dutifully tending to household chores, preparing delectable meals, and contributing to a fulfilling marital life. There were no discernible red flags to warrant such an accusation. Why would I jump to conclusions simply because my daughter made a passing reference to Mama and Ini in the context of a movie scene? The idea struck me as far-fetched, likely a product of my daughter's imaginative mind. Uncertainty still shrouded the identity of Ini, and making unfounded allegations was a grave matter, words once spoken irretrievable. My next course of action was clear: uncover the truth about Ini. Despite the lingering torment of the thought that my wife might be involved with someone named Ini, I found myself gradually pushing this troubling notion to the back of my mind as I went about my daily routines. Fast forward 2 months, and it had now been 9 months since our relocation to the new apartment. One day, we took our dog for a walk at a nearby community park. Alongside me were my daughter, my wife, and our faithful canine companion. As we strolled, we unexpectedly encountered a man and his dog coming from the opposite direction. An intriguing occurrence unfolded during our walk in the park that day. My dog appeared to recognize the stranger's dog immediately. They behaved as if they were old acquaintances, both animals displaying a sense of familiarity. My own dog eagerly trotted toward the stranger and his dog, prompting me to hastily pull on the leash to restrain my furry companion. I glanced over at my wife, who seemed to be doing her utmost to avoid acknowledging the situation. She averted her gaze, steadfastly looking ahead. However, it was my daughter who made things even more curious. Upon seeing the man, she called out, "Benny, Benny!" Her tone conveyed the same degree of familiarity that she typically reserved for relatives she knew well. Yet, the man's response was markedly different. He acted as though he had no knowledge of her whatsoever, ignoring our presence and continuing to walk away, tugging his dog along. To him, we appeared to be complete strangers. In an effort to ease the awkwardness that enveloped us, I made eye contact with the man, offering a polite smile, which he reciprocated before moving on. The encounter was brief, lasting only a few seconds, but it felt strangely elongated due to the unsettling energy it left in its wake. I turned to my wife once more, still puzzled by what had just transpired, and inquired about the man's identity, wondering if we had some connection with him. Her response, however, was dismissive. She casually mentioned that he was just an upstairs neighbor, as if she hardly knew him at all. My curiosity was piqued, and I pressed further, questioning how our daughter could possibly know his name if he was merely a neighbor living upstairs. My wife offered a plausible explanation, stating that the man had a habit of letting his dog off the leash, leading to interactions between their dogs. Apparently, he had greeted our daughter on several occasions. While it seemed reasonable at first, a nagging feeling persisted within me. 2 months earlier, when my daughter had spotted a romantic scene in a movie and called out, "Mama and Ini," the same Ini was now the person she had called out to, who turned out to be our neighbor. This felt like more than just a coincidence. When I had previously asked my daughter about Ini, she had pointed to the ceiling, an unusual response. Now, my wife confirmed that Ini was indeed an upstairs neighbor. This alignment couldn't be brushed aside as mere happenstance. Something was undeniably amiss. I was resolute in my determination to uncover the truth, even though my wife's strange behavior and secrecy had me questioning my previously unwavering trust in her. While I had never caught her in a lie before, there was an unsettling air of suspicion. The remainder of our walk transpired in silence, the encounter with Enid casting a shadow over my thoughts. I contemplated various scenarios and the potential upheaval in my life if my wife were truly involved in an affair. The notion of her closeness to another man repulsed me, although the evidence was primarily circumstantial. Upon our return home, my wife noticed my unease and inquired about the cause. I responded curtly, claiming it was nothing, and fell into contemplative silence. The next day, the question weighed heavily on my mind. Where there's smoke, could there be fire? Driven by the need for answers, I turned to the internet to share my story, hoping to find support and guidance. Perhaps there was someone who had experienced a similar situation and could offer advice on how to determine if my wife was indeed having an affair with Enid. In the midst of my anxiety, I couldn't help but wonder if I was being overly paranoid and jeopardizing my marriage without sufficient cause. My first priority was to ascertain the real name of the man, as it occurred to me that Annie might simply be his dog's name. If that were the case, my suspicions would crumble, as it would be impossible for Mama to be romantically involved with a dog. I also reminded myself not to take my 4-year-old daughter's words too seriously. Children have vivid imaginations, and their statements can be far from concrete. Some individuals on the forum I consulted had suggested hiring a private investigator to unveil the identity of our upstairs neighbor. My schedule was too demanding to allow for snooping through his mail or following him myself. Taking time off from work to track his movements and uncover his profession seemed enticing, but hiring a private investigator appeared to be a more convenient, cost-effective, and emotionally manageable option. I found a private investigator online who specialized in infidelity cases. I shared the gate code to my apartment and outlined my daily routine, explaining the task at hand. His initial mission was to uncover our neighbor's name, his workplace, his schedule, and his relationship with my wife. The first week of this investigation was strenuous. I had to maintain an appearance of normalcy around my wife, going about my daily routine as if nothing were amiss. I aimed to keep her guard down and avoid arousing suspicion. It was crucial for me not to harbor resentment toward her at this stage, as I was still in the process of uncovering the truth, and my judgments were based on speculation and circumstantial evidence. After a week, I rendezvoused with the private investigator at a pre-arranged location to receive his report. He divulged his findings, revealing that our neighbor's first name was Tenny, though for obvious reasons, I couldn't disclose his full last name. Tenny was 30 years old and recently divorced, sharing custody of his 2 children with his ex-wife, who had retained the house in their divorce settlement. This explained why he was residing in our apartment complex. Tenny had a girlfriend and was invested in fitness. The investigator went on to disclose that Tenny worked as a logistics manager at a distribution company, overseeing several employees, the majority of whom were female. The investigator handed me a folder containing photographs of my wife and daughter at the dog park, captured sitting on the same bench as Tenny while their dogs played nearby. According to the investigator, their interaction appeared amicable, with no observed physical contact or signs of affection. This revelation was disconcerting, as it contradicted my wife's claims of not knowing Tenny or his name. Multiple photographs depicted them engaged in conversation. At this point, I had strong reasons to believe that my daughter's initial assertion might have been accurate all along. Tenny bore a striking resemblance to Tenny. What disturbed me most was the possibility that my daughter might have witnessed something inappropriate between them. To this day, it continues to trouble me. We had never engaged in such behavior in front of our daughter, even when she was an infant. Our displays of affection were always kept private, although I would characterize our intimate life as healthy. We were not typically affectionate outside the bedroom. When the private investigator asked if I wanted to continue his services, I decided to retain him for an additional 2 weeks, although I wasn't entirely certain what else I hoped to discover. There was no way he could catch my wife and Tenny publicly displaying affection unless it occurred within my apartment or his. However, the initial debriefing provided some encouragement, and I felt compelled to delve deeper into the situation. In the subsequent week's debriefing, the private investigator observed that Tenny appeared to be involved with multiple women. He witnessed him going out with 4 different women, 2 of whom were his subordinates, a clear violation of most company policies. However, the investigators' findings yielded little new information about my wife, save for the fact that she occasionally spent time with Teeny in the park, often in the company of our daughter. During the third week of the investigation, I asked the detective to delve deeper into the women with whom Teeny was allegedly involved. I wanted to determine if any of them were married. The investigator's inquiry revealed that one of these women was indeed married, with children of her own, while the other woman remained single. Unfortunately, he couldn't gather any information about the third woman involved with Teeny. At this point, I couldn't help but view Teeny as a despicable person. He was engaging in extramarital affairs and potentially abusing his authority at work. Moreover, there was a high likelihood that he was also involved with my wife. I desperately needed more concrete evidence to confirm whether Teeny had a relationship with my spouse. While I already had some proof of my wife's deception, I wanted to ascertain if she was jeopardizing my health and the paternity of our child. To aid in this pursuit, the investigator provided me with a discreet hidden camera, which I was to install in our house, including our bedroom. Alongside it, he offered detailed instructions on how to monitor the camera remotely. During the initial week of surveillance, I observed nothing out of the ordinary. There were no signs of Teeny visiting our apartment. The second week yielded the same uneventful results. I began contemplating the possibility of abandoning the surveillance, fearing that my wife might discover the hidden camera. She meticulously cleaned the entire house each day, making it increasingly challenging to maintain its concealed location. I had contemplated confronting her based on the evidence I had already gathered, and considered filing for divorce, citing her emotional affair as the reason. However, the proof of infidelity was tenuous at best, as it only consisted of evidence of her lying to me. I could have mentioned what our daughter had disclosed, but I hesitated, fearing my wife's denial and not wanting to strain their relationship any further. It was possible that their clandestine activities took place at Teeny's apartment, beyond the reach of my surveillance. There was no feasible way for the private investigator to stake out our apartment building's stairs and monitor my front door throughout the day. I had been on the verge of giving up, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I resolved to continue for one more week, and that decision ultimately paid off. The roller coaster of emotions I experienced during that time was overwhelming, a mixture of sadness, humiliation, and a profound sense of relief that this agonizing 4-month ordeal was finally nearing its conclusion. It had been a full 11 months since we had moved into this apartment. My daughter had been right all along, having informed me of her suspicions 4 months prior. Now, I had caught my wife in the act, and I felt compelled to share what I had witnessed on camera. On a morning when I left for work, my wife took our daughter and the dog for a walk. Upon their return, they were accompanied by Teeny. They all entered our apartment together, with Teeny following behind my wife and our daughter leading the way. Then, I watched as Teeny came up from behind, embracing my wife and tenderly kissing her neck. She turned to face him, and they engaged in a passionate kiss. The only thing preventing them from getting closer was her 6-month pregnancy, the paternity of which was now uncertain it could be mine or Teeny's. This conclusive evidence gave me the confidence to finally confront her. Their encounter hadn't escalated beyond kissing and touching, but it was undeniable proof of her betrayal, and I knew it was time to address the situation. It pained me deeply to witness how she repaid my love and unwavering commitment. I had always treated her with respect, never resorted to anger, and provided for all her needs. Despite all this, she couldn't remain faithful or offer me the loyalty I rightfully deserved. Her actions not only jeopardized my well-being, but also endangered my life by engaging in an affair with a man who had multiple partners, exposing me to life-threatening STDs. She betrayed the role of being the sole provider for our family, behaving in a manner that was deeply disappointing. It was time to have a serious conversation with her. Upon my arrival home, I confronted my wife about her relationship with Teeny. Initially, she denied any knowledge of what I was talking about and acted oblivious. However, the fear in her eyes betrayed the truth she had been concealing. Her secret was no longer hidden when I presented her with pictures of her and Teeny together in the park. It was at that moment she finally admitted to knowing him, but insisted that they were just talking, claiming that nothing inappropriate had occurred. That's when I revealed the existence of the hidden camera, which led to her cries of shock and embarrassment. Initially, I didn't feel anger or become overly emotional, as I had already shed countless tears over the past 2 months. She fell to the floor, prostrating herself and begging at my feet. I asked her how long the affair had been going on, and she confessed that it started 2 months after we moved into the apartment. It had been almost a year since our relocation. Curiosity compelled me to inquire about how it all began, and according to her, they had met at the park and started chatting. Tenny claimed to be a fitness trainer and had a small gym set up in his apartment. Since she was feeling bored at home, she accepted his invitation to visit his apartment, and that's how it all started, according to her account. Over a year has passed since the confrontation, and I find myself relatively calmer now. Nevertheless, the emotions remain raw, and the pain of my reputation being tarnished by this woman lingers. Even today, it feels as though people are looking at me with disdain. Tears were shed by both of us, and she attempted to beg me not to divorce her, citing the potential disgrace it would bring to her and her family. In her presence, I called her parents and shared everything she had done. I was certain that her father would deal with her before I did, considering she had disrespected his family too. What I admire about the old school values from back home is the strong sense of responsibility. I informed my wife that she could not continue living with me in my apartment. However, I couldn't immediately evict her, especially since her name was on the lease, and she was pregnant, though the paternity of the baby remained uncertain. I explained to her that she would be sleeping in a different room until I found her another apartment to rent. I agreed to cover the rent for 3 months while she searched for a job, and after that, she would be on her own. Some might expect me to kick her out immediately, but the situation was more complex. I needed her to take care of our daughter until I found a suitable babysitter. Missing work or losing focus was not an option for me due to my many responsibilities. At that time, I didn't know the identity of the baby's father, adding further complexity to the situation. 2 days later, I assisted her in locating a new apartment and facilitated her signing the divorce agreement. We aimed to minimize expenses on legal proceedings, so we chose mediation. We had been married for 5 years, with her spending 4 of those years as a homemaker, earning significantly less than me when she did work. According to the divorce agreement, I was obligated to pay her alimony for 1.5 years. She couldn't return to her parents or other family members due to her shame regarding her actions. Nearly everyone who knew her was aware of the reason for our divorce. As for Tenny, we later found out that the woman he was involved with also had a boyfriend. We shared evidence of their affair with her boyfriend, her co-worker's husband, who had children, and the boyfriend of the other woman, who didn't work with Tenny. They all received copies of the proof of their infidelity. We also contacted the HR department and provided them with the evidence, without needing to remind them that he had violated company policy by engaging in a relationship with his subordinates. Fortunately, the company he worked for had a policy against such behavior, and he was eventually terminated. I had never really spoken to Tenny before, except for exchanging smiles during our dog walks. However, once I was determined, I worked hard and invested a significant amount of money to disrupt his life, just as he had done to mine. He ended up unemployed and had to move out of his apartment. I'm not certain if he knew I was the one behind it all, but I'm sure my ex-wife must have told him something. About 6 months after my daughter informed me about her mother and Tenny, my ex-wife gave birth. Even though we weren't living together, I went to the hospital to determine if the baby was mine. Tenny is Hispanic, and people from my country have a similar complexion, so the baby could easily resemble him. We decided to conduct a paternity test, but the results wouldn't be available until the next day. No one else was there for the delivery except for me. It was a stark contrast to when our daughter was born, and the entire village gathered at the hospital. She had become an outcast, and her last months of pregnancy were filled with regret and despair. I was only there because there was a chance the baby could be mine. She pleaded for mercy and begged for forgiveness while on the delivery bed, right up until she went into labor. She was relieved to see that I was there. I sent Tenny a letter from the hospital, informing him that he had a baby, but he never showed up. Months later, my ex-wife told me that he only began showing interest when she initiated child support. Now, my ex-wife works full-time and leads a challenging life, earning a wage similar to that of a high school teacher. I wouldn't call it difficult, but compared to her life before, it's certainly more challenging. I have full custody of my daughter, despite our divorce agreement stating shared custody. I employ a full-time babysitter because I don't want my daughter residing in a rundown apartment. I want to shield her from a challenging life. I earn enough and work too hard for her to live in such conditions. Thank you for watching. Like and share now.